Inflation is on the rise, predicted to hit 11% later this year. That's what the Bank of England said this week. The economy looks set to contract this quarter, and interest rates have risen to their highest level since 2009. Back then, Gordon Brown was Prime Minister and dealing with the aftermath of the global financial crash. What does he make of the current situation today? He joins me now from Fife. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the Bank of England's saying that inflation is going to reach 11%. Do you think it could go even higher?
It's going to be high, and Britain's going to have some of the worst inflation. But this is, first of all, a global problem that needs a global solution. We're actually leaderless at the moment, but we're not powerless. We could do what we did in 2009 and bring people together. There's a food crisis, 800 million on the verge of starvation. There's an energy crisis with oil prices going up, affecting every country. Inflation crisis, recession in prospect, and of course on top of COVID and conflict and climate change, which is affecting every country. So Boris Johnson may be going to Rwanda and then to Germany, but he really ought to be getting world leaders together, and they should concoct a plan that deals in a concerted and comprehensive way that can get oil prices down, can get food supply moving around the world, and can get control of inflation. Now, this is initially something that they can do as a global initiative by world leaders.
You said in an article in a newspaper today that the country is facing a set of challenges similar to the 1930s, the so-called Devil's Decade. Do you really think it could be that bad here?
Well, we've got protectionism, we've got war in Europe, we've got a form of jingoism and nationalism in different countries pursuing their own selfish interests, and we're in danger of having a global recession. So we have to face up to these problems. I say Churchill said that people at the time were resolved to be irresolute and adamant for drift and solid for fluidity and all-powerful for impotence, and that's, I'm afraid, where the world looks at the moment. When people say they don't know what the plan is, that's because there is no plan. We've got to get together and agree how we can combat both the energy and food crisis initially, and then get control of inflation. Now, there are domestic things we can do, and we can come to that, but initially you need to get world leaders together. We did it before, and we did it, of course, at other crucial times, facing multiple crises, and this is one of the biggest crises that the world has faced for many years.
You know all about inflation, obviously. Your role as Chancellor, you're well steeped in that. But I just want to get a sense from you of how much worse you think it could get. You said it will be high. Will it be higher than 11%?
Well, it could be, but I think the most important thing that you've got to recognise is we've got both inflation and the prospect of recession. And it's when the two come together that living standards fall, jobs are at risk, and of course family budgets are under huge pressure. And the government really does need a plan. I am proposing a fourth budget. We've had 3 budgets this year. We need to do 3 things. First of all, we need to get inflation on a pathway towards stable prices. And quite frankly, the Bank of England has not done that. Secondly, the government's got to help ease family poverty, because child poverty is going to go beyond 5 million if we don't take further action. And thirdly, I think what people are really looking for is a plan for growth to get out of this. A plan, an industry policy. Now, Britain's one of the few countries without a policy for industry. A trade policy, Michael Martin just talked about this. We don't have a trade deal either with America or with Europe. So in or out of Brexit, we've really got to get our trading relations sorted out. And we've got enormously good technology in IT and digital, in environmental technology, medical and life sciences. And we really have to have a growth plan that people can come behind to show that living standards can rise over the next few years, and at the same time we can afford our public services. Now, without that plan, and there is no plan, there is no programme of action, the government is going from crisis to crisis and scandal to scandal. We cannot see the way out of this. We will have pain now and pain later. What we need is minimising pain now and maximising gain later.
In 2006, you capped pay rises, didn't you, for public sector workers for 3 years in order to control inflation. Why is that different now?
Well, inflation was very low at that point. Look, what we've got at the moment is a unique set of circumstances. And you can understand that this is not one group of workers trying to leapfrog another. This is almost every worker in the country facing the biggest hit on their standards of living for 50 years. Now, any sensible government would get people round the table. I would have a National Economic Council and bring people together. I would explain to them what the problem really is globally and nationally, and I would show them that they could share in the proceeds of growth if we can get things sorted out. that we can be fair. Yes, there maybe have to be a cap on executive pay because that has been rising fast. And at the same time, of course, I think we've got to show that we have a plan for growth. People must know that there's some purpose in what is happening now, and the government has not set forward a plan that shows we can actually get growth back in the future.
So
we're a country that's lost
What is a fair pay rise, though, for public sector workers, people who are really struggling with bills now, who are trying to keep up with the rising prices? What is a fair pay rise for public sector workers? Would you advocate one?
Well, that's for negotiation, obviously, because I'm not party to all the facts about what's happening. But the important thing, it's got to be over 1 year, 2 years and 3 years. You can't just talk about this year. You've got to talk about the pressure on the standards of living next year and the year after. And people have got to see a way out of this. At the moment, no government minister can explain any strategy for the next year, 2 years or 3 years. There is no plan, no programme of action, and there's got to be one. Otherwise, you can't bring people along with you. And when we have a global crisis and also a worsening national crisis, because we will have higher inflation and lower growth prospects, you've got to show that you've got action at a global scale and action at a national scale. It's what we tried to do in 2009, and we dealt with a global financial crisis. We've got a multiple set of crises now, and I think we can deal with them by showing people we have a way through.
Is tax cuts a way out of this crisis?
Well, I suspect that what the government will have to do in the autumn is abandon their corporate tax rise. I suspect they'll not be able to go ahead with their fuel tax rise because that's another pressure, obvious, on inflation. But what you need to do is look at a fair set of answers. And the first thing they've got to do, I'll be honest about this, I am shocked by the fact that so many families and so many children are going to be forced into poverty during this winter. Despite Chancellor Sunak's proposals last month, I see millions of families in poverty and millions of children going to school ill-clad and hungry, people unable to afford to put up their heating. Now, something has got to be done about this, and it has to be done in a far fairer way than the previous three budgets. That's why I'm pressing. You may have had three budgets, and that may seem enough, but you're going to have a fourth budget. It's absolutely essential, not just to deal with family poverty, but to show a pathway forward to growth, including stable prices.
Income tax.
But we do need a policy for our industry.
What about income tax cuts, though? Is that can you get out of this with an income tax cut now?
Well, the government's got a problem because they're promising income tax cuts at the same time as they're promising better public services. And they're going to have to be honest with the public about what can be afforded. My view is we must take action to get people's standards of living, costs of living down, but that is probably through helping those middle and lower income families who, because of the numbers of children who are in poverty, need help at the moment, and that is probably the best way of doing it.
You say in your book that you've written a book about the world coming together to solve big global issues like, for example, the war in Ukraine, like the refugee crisis. Arguably, the war in Ukraine has brought the West together. Boris Johnson's just been in Kyiv this week at the forefront of Western efforts to respond to Russian aggression. You must agree with that.
Yes, and I applaud NATO unity, but, you know, there is a problem about coordinating sanctions where some countries are not prepared to do it, and war aims where some countries have different war aims in relation to Russia. But what we've also seen is global disunity. 82 countries refuse to support the action against Russia for its breach of human liberties. 150 countries around the world are not imposing sanctions. So we have global disunity, and one of the reasons is we have not shown people that globalization, which is led by the West, is working to reduce poverty, raise living standards, and of course deal with climate change in the poorer countries. And we really have to honor our promises. 2 billion people remain unvaccinated, despite the fact we have 24 billion vaccines being produced this year. And of course, climate change promises to Africa have not been met. So we have to show that it's the world and not just NATO that can come together when we have a problem.
There's been a lot of comment this week about Keir Starmer and his image, a future Prime Minister. Can you be a boring man, as some of his colleagues have apparently called him? You had a lot of focus on your image when you were leader. What is your advice to Keir Starmer?
To ignore this, because what's exciting about the possibility of Keir Starmer's leadership is he will have a plan for Britain. He will show how we can get back growth. He will show how we can get living standards rising again. And he will show how we can have a fairer society that deals with problems like climate change. So I don't think politicians need to be making outrageous statements, like in fact Grat Shamps, who you're about to interview, has been today inciting people. I think politicians have got a role to get people around the table, to get people talking, explaining what's happening and getting answers. Now, Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions. He's been a great public servant over many years, and I think he'll make a great Prime Minister.
Gordon Brown, thank you very much for joining us this morning.